Go ahead, Professor Amaratunaga.
Thank you very much, Professor Senanayaka. Teruvan Saranai. First of all, let me thank Professor Manori Senanayaka and the servants of Buddha for inviting me to talk on my book titled Controversies Related to Buddhism. They had seen a review of this book by Professor Chandima Vijayabandara, Professor of Buddhist Philosophy and former Vice Chancellor of the University of Sri Jagadinapura, and had thought of inviting me to talk on the book and related matters. The book was published by Motilal Banarsidass, New Delhi, India, the reputed publisher of religious books in India, and was distributed in Sri Lanka by Buddhist Cultural Center, Nadimala Dehiwala. My book attempts to analyze the controversies related to Buddhism by examining the circumstances that led to dissent and sectarianism and formation of various schools and branches of Buddhism, and a comparison of their philosophies and doctrines. Further, these theories are compared with the Vedic tradition and the other contemporary religions like Ajivika, the philosophies like materialism, skepticism, and also with the Western philosophies were relevant. I have looked at most of the major doctrines and concepts of Buddhism, such as anicca, dukkha, anatta, existence, reality, consciousness, karma, rebirth, and nibbana, arhat, etc., from this point of view. However, I must say that there are two views regarding the development of sectarianism and the various schools of Buddhism. One is that it was due to dissent among the Sangha and deepening conflict arising out of different interpretation of Buddha's word. That was one view. The other view is that there was no such disruptive controversies, and that the development of schools like Mahasangika, Sarvastivada, Mahayana was a natural process of evolution of Buddhism. And the most famous subscriber to this point of view is Venerable Dhamma Jyoti of Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, who had written several papers and delivered talks explaining his position. However, regarding these two views, most of the Sri Lankan scholars like Professor K.N. Jayatilaka, Professor D.J. Kalupana, Y. Karunadasa are of the opinion that the development of different schools of Buddhism was due to intractable differences of opinion arising out of not evolution of ideas, but doctrinal interpretation of the Dhamma. Their writings point out that the major differences that exist between Theravada and Mahayana and Tantrayana indicate that these schools have taken different paths and not traveled in the same path as an evolutionary process. So there were two views. One view was that it was a natural process of evolution. There were no sectarianism or differences of opinion and so on. But the other view says that there were differences, there were conflicts, there was controversy, and that those controversies caused the development of various schools and branches of Buddhism. In my book, I have made a comparative study of these schools in relation to the major doctrines and concepts found in early Buddhism. Now, let us see what is accepted as early Buddhism. As you know, is what is given in the four major nikayas in the Sutta Pitaka: the Digha Nikaya, the Majjhima Nikaya, Anguttara Nikaya, and Samyutta Nikaya. These were the four nikayas and the only nikayas that were assigned to the elder monks at the first Dharma Sangayanava, held 3 months after the Buddha's parinirvana. to be studied, recited, and carried forward by the oral tradition. So these were the four suttas, nikayas that were carried forward, and that is as close to Buddha's word as possible. The four groups of monks under the headship of senior monks were formed, and it was the responsibility of these groups to preserve the four major nikayas. These monks who specialized in learning the suttas and preserving them by the oral traditions were known as Bhanakas. These were the suttas that were brought to Sri Lanka by Arahat Mahinda after being revived. Please note that they were revived and cleansed of all impurities at the third Dhamma Sanghayana before it was brought to Sri Lanka. And that was the third Dhamma Sanghayana was held under the auspices of King Dharmasu and presided by Arahat Moggalli Putta Tissa, who removed all impurities that had found its way into Buddhism. According to Dr. E.W. Adhikaram, Bhanakas may have come to Sri Lanka also, carrying the Dhamma by the oral tradition. It was this Buddhism that was written down at Aluvihara. So what is found in these four nikayas could be considered as close to Buddha's word as possible, and they form the basis of early Buddhism. What is known as early Buddhism is what is found in these four nikayas. And this formed the reference base for my book as well. Now let us look at how this early Buddhism changed and evolved and broke up into several schools. There had been two main reasons for this. One is the belief or interpretation that Buddha was a supernatural being. And the other was the anatma or no self-concept. We can examine these two reasons in a little more detail. How did the idea that Buddha was supernatural being come about? After Buddha's parinirvana, the elder monks had focused their attention more on the study and propagation of Dhamma, while the younger monks, saddened by the loss of their teacher, had attempted to popularize Buddha's virtues, often exceeding the boundaries of reality. The historical Buddha was thus made into a larger-than-life phenomenon. These developments were resented by the elder monks, and this grew into a major conflict. These conflicts had continued even after the first Dhamma Sanghayana. As the differences could not be ironed out, the second Dhamma Sanghayana was held 100 years after the first. At this convention, some of the younger monks broke away as a group and formed their own sect called the Mahasangika. The elder monks who concentrated their mind on the Dhamma formed their own school, which came to be known as Theravada, which means elders' views. The word Thera refers to older and mature monks who may have attained Margapala, the various stages of the path to the final goal. The effort of the younger monks to create a larger-than-life Buddha resulted in the introduction of elements of transcendentalism into Buddhism, very early in its history. Transcendentalism remains a major controversial core factor in Buddhism up to the present times and has given rise to many controversies. Now let us understand what transcendentalism means in the religious sphere. The word transcend means beyond limits. Transcendentalism entails phenomena beyond reality and the realm of this empirical world. In the sphere of religion, transcendentalism is a philosophy that asserts the primacy of the spiritual over the material and the empirical. Buddha depended on empirical methods to gain knowledge, and his theories are based on empirical evidence. Therefore, transcendentalism could be a controversial issue when considered in the context of Buddhism. Now, let us look at the other main reason for the dissent among the Sangha, the Anatma theory. Regarding the Anatma theory, there were serious questions posed by external as well as internal thinkers regarding the Anatma or no self theory of Buddhism. They asked the question, if there is no self or anything like it, who or what would be responsible for karmic consequences and rebirth? If there's no self and if there's only the Panchaskandha, how could there be karmic consequences and rebirth? Can you hear me?
Yes,
Can you hear me?
Very much
But
so.
I can't see you now.
Oh, that's okay. I can hear you. That's fine.
Okay. Okay.
I will switch on the videos. That's fine.
Right. Okay. Now I can see you. They asked the question, if there is no self or anything like it, who or what would be responsible for karmic consequences and rebirth? In the attempt to formulate plausible answers to these questions, 3 breakaway schools came into being. 3 breakaway schools were formed because of this Anatma theory, the problem about the no self. These 3 breakaway schools were Puggalavada, Sarvastivada, and Sautantrika. A brief look at these 3 schools of Buddhism would be important, as it may, as they may have provided the philosophical basis for the major schools like Mahayana later on. Scholars who think that there were no branching of Buddhism and there was a natural process of evolution tend to believe that Puggalavada, Sarvastivada, and Sautantrika were the middle stage of this evolutionary process. Others who disagree with this view are of the opinion that Sarvastivada and Sautantrika were 2 extremes, one submitting an eternalist viewpoint and the other a nihilist view, thus deviating from Buddha's middle position. Puggalavada was the earliest group to break away, but they remained as a branch of Theravada. They were not different from Theravada. They were in the same stream as Theravada. All these 3 schools. They tried to solve the problem regarding the Anatma theory by saying that apart from Panchaskandha, there is a Puggala or person which is responsible for karmic consequences and rebirth. We know that according to Buddhism, a human being consists of the 5 aggregates: Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankara, Vijnana. Puggalavada says that there is a person apart from the 5 aggregates which is responsible for karmic consequences, rebirth, and morality, which exist continuously as long as the samsaric process lasts. However, they were believers of the anatta concept also. They said that there is no self, but there is a Puggala or a person. Puggalavadins faced numerous questions from Theravadins regarding the nature of this person, the Puggala. What is the relationship between Panchaskandha and Puggala? Are they different or same? Does it have an absolute true existence? Is it external to the Panchaskandha? These were the questions. These questions, as could be seen, arise out of early Buddhist concepts and doctrines that govern existence and composition of human form. In answer to these questions, the Puggalavadins claimed that their theory is based on Buddha's preaching and pointed out that the Barahara Sutta in the Samyutta Nikaya, Buddha had spoken about the burden, bara, and also the bearer, hara, of the burden. The burden here is the Panchaskandha and the bearer is the Puggala. The response of the Theravadins to this idea was that Puggalavadins are confused about the manner of Buddha's preaching, who used 2 methods to explain the Dhamma, direct and the indirect, Nitatta and Naitatta. Puggalavadins maintain that the Puggala is neither matter nor a mere concept, It exists parallel to the Panchaskandha and is not the same as Panchaskandha, no different. It is neither conditioned nor unconditioned. On further questioning, they had said that the Puggala or its relationship with Panchaskandha was inexpressible and cannot be described with the words in the language in use. Puggalavadins considered Nirvana as a real entity. The person Puggala and Nibbana are neither same nor different, they said. So it's a bit confusing and not very clear their point of view about Nirvana, about existence, and so on. However, another breakaway group that attempted to find a solution to the question regarding Anatma was Sarvastivada. Now, Sarvastivada is a very important school of Buddhism. And let us look at Sarvastivada in little more detail. Sarvastivada made its appearance in the 3rd century BC. Sarvastivada said that apart from the Panchaskandha, there is a thing called Swabhava, which existed throughout the samsaric cycle and was responsible for karma and rebirth. Instead of Puggala, now Sarvastivada says there's a Swabhava, apart from the Panchaskandha, which is responsible for karmic consequences and rebirth, and it exists throughout the samsaric cycle. Now we can see that the two main dissenting views, one on the nature of the Buddha, whether he was supernatural, and the other on the question of the Anatma concept, had caused the birth of several breakaway groups. Controversy regarding the nature of the Buddha led to the formation of Mahasangika school, and the controversy regarding the Anatma theory led to the birth of Puggalavada and Sarvastivada. These were not minor religious organizations. They spread throughout the northern parts of India and beyond, and lasted for centuries. Sarvastivada contributed immensely to the development of the Abhidhamma. The Swabhava theory of Sarvastivada says that the phenomenon of Swabhava exist in the past, present, and the future, and in this sense, their theory was eternalist. There were monks within Sarvastivada who did not agree with this eternalist theory, and they put forward a theory that said nothing existed, and instead there was a process of continuous change. And these monks formed another branch called Sautrantika, which came into being in the 1st century Christian era. They were considered nihilist, for they said nothing existed. These two schools, Sarvastivada and Sautrantika, held two extreme views on existence. One was eternalist and the other was nihilist. You know that Buddha took a middle position with regard to the question of existence. The importance of these two schools is the stand they took on several concepts such as existence, time, karma, etc., while remaining under the umbrella of Theravada, and the influence these different interpretations would have had on the future evolution of Buddhism. These two schools of Buddhism did not adopt transcendental theories unlike Mahasangika sect, which attempts to convert the historical Buddha into a larger-than-life image, and therefore they could continue in the stream of Theravada. Yet their extreme views on some of the important tenets of Buddhism may have led to the growth of different schools such as Mahayana, etc. These views of the two schools, though they were centuries apart in origin, were often antagonistic, but was rich in scholarly method and analysis. It must be said that the philosophical views put forward by these schools, particularly the Sarvastivadins, had contributed immensely to the development of Buddhist thought after Buddha's parinirvana had enriched the philosophical fabric of the whole of Asia. I had said that early concepts of transcendentalism, which had been introduced to Buddhism soon after Buddha's parinirvana, had paved the way for sectarianism. Mahasangika sect, which was formed after the second Dhammasangayana, carried these transcendental elements, which may have formed the basis for the development of early Mahayana in the 1st century Christian era. Mahayana latched on to these transcendental concepts and developed them in relation to Arahathood, Buddhahood, Nirvana, and other major concepts of Buddhism. To illustrate this point, let me show the main differences between Theravada and Mahayana. Mahayana developed in the 1st century Christian era, borrowing doctrines from Mahasangika and Sarvastivada, and also influenced by Hinduism to a significant degree. It had the core ideas of the younger monks who broke away from the mainstream of the Sangha, and these ideas were carrying elements of transcendentalism and metaphysical notions. In these ideas, the historical Buddha was elevated to a bigger-than-life phenomenon. Mahayana converted Buddhahood into an eternal state. One may ask, what was their purpose in making such radical changes in the core Buddhist doctrines? Obviously, they wanted to make Buddha a transcendental being, an eternal being, above and beyond the realm of our world. Now, you know that in Theravada, the answer to the question whether Buddha exists after parinirvana, the Buddha's answer was that the question does not arise. When Buddha was asked whether the Buddha would exist after death, he said that the question does not arise. This was one of the 10 questions that Buddha set aside without a definitive answer. This idea did not suit the Mahayanists. Mahayanist idea of transcendentalism. If Buddha is transcendent, he has to be eternal. Thus, they had to change the concept of Buddha and also Arahat. Buddha was made into an eternal phenomenon, and Arahat was demoted to an inferior state. In Theravada, as you know, the Buddha and Arahat are qualitatively equal, and Arahat has reached the final goal. Not so in Mahayana. Arahat has to go further in the path to Nirvana and would have to enter the Bodhisattva stream for this purpose. In Mahayana, Buddha was eternal, not only eternal, omniscient and omnipotent. Now you know that Buddha has said that he is not omniscient. In Tevijja Gotta Sutta, he says that he is not omniscient, that he can't say that he knows everything. Consequently, Mahayanists had to change the path to Nirvana as well. Aryashtanga Marga was not good enough. It only helps to achieve kleshavarana, which means getting rid of the obstacles to the process of throwing out the defilements, lobha, moha, dvesha. That is not enough for Mahayanists. The obstacles to the process of gaining eternal state, omniscience, omnipotence, also had to be got rid of, and this process is called Nyavarana. Thus, omniscience is also factored in as a character of Buddhahood. However, Buddha has said, as I said earlier, Buddha has said that he is not omniscient in the Tevijja Vachagotta Sutta, the Majjhima Nikaya. Path to Nirvana in Mahayana was the Bhakti Marga, a path of faith which they had borrowed from Bhagavad Gita, the main text of Hinduism. And they introduced Bodhisattva concept, which is also borrowed from Hinduism. It is Bodhisattva who followed the Bhakti Marga with the help of gods who were created for this purpose. This shows that Mahayana was weak and could not stand on its own strength and was easily influenced or forced to accept tenets of more powerful religions. As I said, Bhakti Marga or path of faith was borrowed from Hinduism. Buddha did not talk about Bhakti Marga. His method was Jnana Marga, which is path of wisdom, which was the Buddha's most important creation. Jnana Marga was the Buddha's most important creation, the path of wisdom, which is described in the Aryashtangika Marga. Instead, the compassion took center stage in Mahayana, displacing wisdom, which was the highest virtue in early Buddhism. Bodhisattva has to develop compassion to all sentient beings in order to attain Buddhahood. This is controversial because one could be compassionate to the maximum, but that will not get rid of ignorance. Without getting rid of ignorance of the four noble truths, one cannot attain nirvana. Only wisdom can get rid of ignorance. Bhakti Marga entails faith in gods, and Mahayana had to invent a large number of gods for this purpose. These ideas are obviously borrowed from Hinduism. Early Buddhism did not encourage the practitioner to have faith in gods. Advent of rituals in Buddhism could be attributed to the introduction of faith as a virtue to be acquired by the practitioner. Thus, in Mahayana, there is a huge role for an external agent to play in the process of working towards nirvana. It is impossible for the practitioner to achieve the final goal without someone else's assistance. This is contradictory. Nirvana entails purification of the mind. Nobody can purify another person's mind. One has to do it by oneself. This most visible contradiction in the Mahayana has not been solved by its great theoreticians like Asanga and others. Mahayanists did not believe that Buddhas are born in this world of humans. They reside in other worlds, and when it is necessary, they manifest in Nirmana Kaya among people and preach to them. There is no limit to these manifestations. They could assume any form to suit the occasion in order to meet the needs of the people in the effort to attain nirvana. According to Mahayana, the Gautama Buddha is also a manifestation of Nirmanakaya. Gautama Buddha that we worship is also a manifestation of Nirmanakaya. But there is sufficient evidence to believe that Buddha lived and died as a normal human being. And all these metaphysical ideas cannot apply to the historical Buddha. As I said earlier, Mahayana had borrowed several concepts from Hinduism. The Bhakti Marga, Trikaya concept, Bodhisattva concept, gods who help humans to attain nirvana, so on and so forth. The Trikaya concept, which says Buddha has three manifestations of kayas: Dharmakaya, or body of essence, Sambhogakaya, body of enjoyment, and Nirmanakaya, body of creation, is comparable to the three Murti in Hinduism, where Vishnu, Ishvara, and Brahma were the three manifestations of God. And these two systems have similar significance. Now we will consider how Mahayana was introduced into Sri Lanka and its consequences. Mahayana was introduced to Sri Lanka in the 5th century by forceful and deceitful methods. For this purpose, a special sutra was constructed known as Lankavatara Sutra, which castigates Theravada. And Theravada was practiced in Sri Lanka at that time. And they wanted to criticize Theravada. It portrayed Theravada as sinful, as it did not ban eating meat. We know that Theravada did not ban eating meat. However, this sutra did not gain a permanent presence in Sri Lanka, though subsequently it became a very important Mahayana sutra held in high esteem in Tibet and East Asian countries. However, the decisive move to introduce Mahayana to Sri Lanka was the sending of a Mahayana monk named Sanghamitra to Sri Lanka to exploit the conflict between Mahavihara and Abhayagiri in the 3rd century during the time of King Mahasena. Sanghamitra, who had been in Sri Lanka earlier and who probably introduced Mahayana concepts in the form of Vaitulyavada to the Abhayagiriya Vihara, had tutored Mahasen when he was a young prince. Vaitulyavada had been earlier rejected by Mahavihara. However, later when Mahasen came to the throne, Sanghamitra returned from India to Sri Lanka and started his campaign. He could influence the king, and he got him to ill-treat Mahavihara and finally destroy the Mahavihara buildings. Theravada monks had fled to escape the harassment. As a result, Mahayana gained prominence and became the dominant religion until the 10th century. Though Mahayana disappeared from Sri Lanka in the 10th century, it has left behind several of its concepts and practices. Bhakti Marga is commonly practiced in Sri Lanka. The belief in gods who can help us still persists. The rituals which were introduced by Mahayana are still observed. The Yantra, Mantra, Gurukan occult practices arrived in Sri Lanka in the wake of Mahayana, and they continue to plague the people. Rituals are not mentioned in early Buddhism, and there is no evidence that Buddha recommended rituals. The four major Buddhist nikayas, Diga, Madhyama, Anguttara, and Samyutta, do not mention rituals as a component of religious practice. Buddha had not asked his followers to perform any rituals, worship, chanting, offerings, sacrifices, etc. Rituals were a major feature in the Vedic tradition and consequently in Hinduism. And this was borrowed by Mahayana. However, it is important to consider, first of all, the significance of rituals in the religious context. In religions which have an omnipotent God or some other kind of savior, worship and praying are encouraged and sometimes compulsory for devout practitioners of those religions. The worshipper is made to believe that salvation is possible by the intervention of God or similar force in answer to the prayers. Further, the practitioners of these religions are required to have unwavering faith and are expected not to question the ability of the God to deliver despite apparent failures in that regard. This is nothing but blind faith that one is expected to have in God or similar being. It is claimed that when one prays, one is rewarded by the grace of God, but there is no evidence to support this claim. In theistic religions, the final goal is union with God in a transcendental realm beyond the sphere of this world, for which God's grace is required. Thus, the basis of religious rituals is the belief in a supernatural being who helps one to achieve the final goal. In Theravada Buddhism, however, the final goal is nirvana. Nirvana could be achieved only by one's own effort. According to Theravada Buddhism, nirvana cannot be achieved by prayers, worship, and similar rituals, for there is no supernatural being who could respond and help the practitioner of rituals. In Mahayana, on the other hand, the transcendental features in the form of bodhisattva, Trikaya concept, bringing the need for the practice of rituals. Bodhisattva in Mahayana has to perform rituals in his journey to the final goal. So Bhakti Marga is based on rituals and is a concept found in Bhagavad Gita, a major Hindu text. Mahayanists believe that rituals would help in finding union with Dharmakaya, one of the Trikayas, or three manifestations of Buddha, which is comparable to the Trimurti concept in Hinduism, where Vishnu, Ishvara, and Brahma were the three manifestations of God. In contrast, no union with any transcendent being is necessary to achieve nirvana that Buddha discovered. Thus, rituals are compulsory in Mahayana for attaining the final goal, which is supernatural like any in other theistic religions. In this respect, Mahayana seems to be closer to Hinduism than to early Buddhism. There is sufficient evidence to conclude that Buddhism brought to Sri Lanka by Venerable Mahinda was free of supernatural features. All such impurities were got rid of by Venerable Moggalli Puttathissa at the third Dhamma Sanggayana, which was held under the auspices of King Dharmas, just before his son went on his mission to Sri Lanka. Therefore, it may be concluded that the Buddhism practiced in Sri Lanka since Arahat Mahinda's arrival until about the 5th century was free of transcendental features and rituals. So we can conclude that Buddhism practiced in Sri Lanka since Arahat Mahinda's arrival until about the 5th century was free of rituals. Mahayana was the dominant religion in Sri Lanka from the 5th century to the 10th. During this period, it succeeded in getting some of its important tenets introduced into Buddhism in Sri Lanka, chief among which was the transcendentalism and its offspring, the rituals. When Mahayana declined in India, so it did in Sri Lanka too. Yet the damage had been done and its ill effects remain. Natha and Samandeyo, whom Sri Lankan Buddhists worship, are adaptations of Mahayana Bodhisattvas named Avalokitesvara and Samantabhadra respectively. Apart from Mahayana, the other factor that helped in the introduction of rituals was the advent of Venerable Buddha Ghosa in Sri Lanka in the 5th century, the same time that Mahayana came to Sri Lanka. Venerable Buddha Ghosa came here to translate the Sinhala commentaries of the Tripitaka to Pali. There was no need for translating the Sinhala commentaries to Pali because the commentaries were to be used by Sinhalese people who spoke Sinhala. Why translate it to Pali? And in the process, Buddha Ghosa added a substantial amount of transcendental material to the commentaries, which are not present in the original Tripitaka. And some of these recommended rituals and worship. And the Sinhalese commentaries, which are composed on the initiation of Arahat Mahinda for the benefit of Sri Lankan people, whose language was Sinhala, were burnt and destroyed according to the Mahans. So Sinhala commentaries were destroyed, burnt. So we don't have Sinhala commentaries now. But we have the Pali commentaries, which have a lot of impurities and extraneous material. To quote Professor Marasinghe, thus all aspects of the new ritual Buddhism, which changed the Theravada Buddhism into a system of worship, offering and prayer, like any other theistic religion, has been very carefully planned and smuggled into practice. Now, Sumangala Vilasini, the commentary on Diga Nikaya, authored by Buddha Ghosa, describes how Buddha's relics, which usually remain in one mass, as has happened in the case of previous Buddhas, had separated into several pieces to enable them to be deposited in stupas far and wide for purposes of worshipping by many people. Further, Sammoha Vinodani, the commentary on the Vibhanga Sutta of the Abhidhamma, authored by Buddha Ghosa, says the belief that the presence of a relic is equivalent to the presence of Buddha was deep-rooted in the minds of Sinhalese Buddhists. These are all wrong. This is all Buddha Ghosa's work. Though the commentaries seem to encourage the practice of rituals, the corresponding texts do not mention rituals to be of any value. This deviation has to be considered together with the moral, ethics, and that Buddha preached, which in contrast do not give any value to rituals. For instance, the 5 precepts, the Panchasila that we observed just now, do not recommend worship of the Buddha. Neither do the 8 or 10 precepts. Atasil, Dasasil, they don't. The Nikayas do not mention worshipping of Buddha by his disciples, though greeting and respect that they pay to their teacher are mentioned. Do I have time, Professor?
Yes, I think another 10 minutes.
Right. Right. Before the advent of Buddha Ghosa, there were no rituals during the period of 700 years from the 3rd century BC to the 5th century AD. Though there were stupas like Thuparame and statues of Buddha and the Bodhi tree, people treated these as objects of veneration for recollection of the Buddha and his attainment, and not for ritual worship of the theistic kind, which is performed in expectation of benefit. Buddha advised people to offer alms or give away their possessions to help them get rid of attachment to these objects that are impermanent, for it was the cause of suffering. Now we give dana expecting something in return in the next birth. But that was not the purpose for alms, for giving alms, as Buddha advised us. That was to get rid of the lobha. But Buddhists of today offer alms expecting an accumulation of merit as an insurance for a better life in the next birth. The concept of accumulation of merit and its transfer were discussed and rejected at the 3rd Dhamma Sanggayana referred to above, that I mentioned earlier. And therefore, these concepts were not brought to Sri Lanka by Arahat Mahinda. So, practice of ritual worship is associated with theistic religions and was never advocated by Buddha, who said that one could attain freedom from suffering by one's own effort and not by invention of an external agent. Buddha Ghosa paved the way for the entry of ritual worship into the practice of Buddhism, and the belief that worship of stupas, statues, and Bodhi trees would result in the accumulation of merit and rewards. The uniqueness of Buddhism was ruined by these activities. I had also written a book titled Buddhism on the Silk Road, which described the spread of Buddhism. The Silk Road, which existed from the 3rd century BC to about the 12th century Christian era, had extended from China in the east to the Middle East in the west, and had facilitated the transport of not only goods, but also culture, language, and religions. Buddhism, Jainism, Hinduism, and later Christianity spread along these routes. The Silk Road was so named because silk textiles produced in China was transported to the Central Asia, Eastern Europe, and the Middle East on this road. The geographical location of the Silk Road is north of the Himalayan mountain range, which consists of a range of mountains arranged in an arc extending from southeast to northwest, lying between the plains of Indian subcontinent in the south and Tibetan plateau in the north. This network of roads passed through several countries and serviced several more, including China, Mongolia, Tibet, present-day countries like Bhutan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Iran, Greece, Egypt, and so on. They also serviced several ports in the Caspian Sea, Black Sea, and Aral Sea, providing connection between these sea routes. It was King Dharma Asoka who systematically organized the spread of Buddhism after the 3rd Dhamma Sanggayana in the 3rd century BC. He had extended his empire into most of India and beyond into Afghanistan and Greek-Bactria. Bactria is part of the Greek Empire in the northeast of Afghanistan. So Greek-Bactria in the west and present-day Bangladesh in the east. Venerable Mongaliputta Tissa, under the guidance of King Asoka, organized the groups of missionaries. They took the Dhamma to Afghanistan, Greek-Bactria in the west, Himalayas in the south, Burma in the east, and Sri Lanka in the south. After King Asoka, it was King Kanishka, who ruled from Kashmir in the northwest, who took up the missionary work in the 1st century Christian era, King Kanishka. He extended his empire in the west and initiated spread of Buddhism to these areas and China. Both Theravada and Mahayana and also other schools of Buddhism spread along the Silk Road. Even Mahasangika and Sarvastivada spread along the Silk Road during this time, during Kanishka's time. Special mention must be made of the significance of spread of Buddhism to the Greek-Bactrian region. Buddhism had come to this region before Christianity, and a significant community of Buddhists were formed. It was Greeks who first sculptured the figure of Buddha, and these statues exist at present. Greeks wrote Buddhist texts in their script, and they appointed one of their mythological gods as the bodyguard of Buddha. A syncretic form of Buddhism was formed called the Greco-Buddhism. One of the Bactrian kings by the name of Manendra had a dialogue with Nagasena Thera and was converted to Buddhism. And this dialogue came into publication as the Milinda Pratna, which is included in the Theravada Tripitaka. How the contents of this dialogue found its way to Sri Lanka and Aluvihar at the time of writing of the Tripitaka is also interesting. According to the Mahamsa, there had been exchange of emissaries between Greece and Sri Lanka, and it was such a mission that had brought Milinda Nagasena dialogue to Sri Lanka. When talking about spread of Buddhism, the role played by Mahavihara at Anuradhapura must also be mentioned. This monastery helped countries like Thailand and Cambodia to establish Theravada at a time when other religions were competing to get a foothold in those countries. That's all that I have to say, Professor Senanayaka. Thank you very much for everybody who have been listening via Zoom. And if there's any discussion or comments or observations, most welcome. And thank you very much, servants of Buddha and everybody.
Thank you very much. And I'm very pleased that, well, there were controversies from the time of the Buddha, but that it all ended with what we stand for, which is Dana Sila Bhavana and not Dana Sila Buddha Puja, is what we finally came to and understood how it got corrupted to an extent. I would like to now open the floor and give me a minute because I need to then unmute. I hope I can allow participants. I think you can all unmute yourselves. I'll just see, say for example.
Anybody who wants to ask anything or make an observation can unmute.
Samantha, I think you have unmuted. I think anyone who wants to comment, I would have liked some Buddhist scholars here, but today it so happened I'm sure there are plenty who are very well read and who would understand, but controversies will always exist. And as long as the intention of the controversies is not just malicious like maybe Devadatta, but we once had a presentation on the historical survey by Mahendra Jayasekara, the current YMDA president, who also went through this with every council, how there was a breakaway. But today we heard at more detail all the thinking behind each of those was. But those Sravastivada and all those ones are now not heard of. They have all got amalgamated into Mahayana, is it? Is that how it went? But anyway, we'd like comments, please, and questions. And if anybody disagrees with anything, please, this is the time, because it is good to always look at the Theravada tradition, which is the closest to what the Buddha said, and compare and look at it with that. Please unmute. I think you can unmute now. I think I have
I
asked.
have
Yes.
unmuted myself.
Sujata, can you say?
Yeah, I'm unmuted. I unmuted myself.
Yes, yes.
Is it okay?
Yes, Sujata, please.
Yeah.
I don't know who it is who is Ranjit. You are muted. Somebody else, right? Yes, Sujata, go ahead.
Yeah, just to clarify something, for Sangamitra, the story behind that was related now, doesn't it differ from what we know of Sangamitra?
Sangamita, if you are referring to Sangamita who brought
Buddhism.
the Bodhi sapling is different. I mean, are you referring to that Sangamita?
That's right. That's right.
That
Yeah.
is daughter of King Dharmasukha,
Ashoka.
supposed to be daughter of Sang.
That's right. I was confused on that, the two names.
No, not the same person. This Sangamita is a Mahayana, and he was finally killed by the queen, Mahasen's queen. She planned his murder, and he was murdered.
Oh, I see.
Because he was trying to introduce Mahayana. That's a different Sangamita.
Can I
Thank
call
you.
you back? I'm on a Zoom lecture.
Sorry?
I think I might have to.
I'm still muted, and I
No,
unmute.
you're not muted. We can. Samantha,
I can
go ahead.
hear.
Samantha, please go ahead. Samantha? Samantha has raised her hand. Can't unmute, please, she says. 1 minute. Samantha.
Yes. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Manori. I can unmute now. I'd just like to, thank you, Professor. That was a really fascinating talk. I learned a lot. I just want to find out, so when we're learning the Dhamma, what suttas then can we say that it's true to Buddha's talks? Would it be from, I mean, they say from the early Buddhist texts. Sorry if I may have missed what you were talking earlier on, or may have misunderstood. So how do I know from the suttas that they're a reliable source of exactly what Buddha's teachings are, and I'm learning the proper teachings?
The four major nikayas, suttas found in the four major nikayas, the Diga, Majjhima, Samyutta. Yeah, those four contain the early Buddhism. Early Buddhism is contained in these four nikayas, and also the Chinese Agama scripts. They also corroborate what is found in the four nikayas, and they are the nikayas, the suttas that were assigned to the leading monks, the chief monks at the first Dhamma Sanghayana to be preserved by the oral tradition. So we can conclude that these four nikayas would be closest to Buddha's preachings.
Would that be from the first council?
That's right.
As from the first council.
First council.
Right. And they have been transported down.
That's
to
right.
What we are learning now.
Yeah. Yes. The Arahat Mahinda brought those sutras to Sri Lanka after the third Sangha, the third council.
Okay. Thank you, Professor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Samantha. That was a very useful question because I think once before we have heard on this forum that the oral tradition was a very safe way, even more than the written, because the written can get corrupted with subsequent editions. But when it is recited and in groups, chanted as the suttas were, you can't move it, you can't change it when it's in verse. And this was there in the Pasadika Sutta, I think, where after the Jain leader Mahavira passed away, there had been very soon some issues there of dissent and controversies. And when this reached the Buddha's, it was told to the Buddha, that was 10 years before him that the Mahavira passed away, and he strongly recommended this oral tradition. That's
right. Yes, that's right.
Any other questions? I will once again make sure that you can all unmute. So you can unmute. I think anyone could mute if they wish to. Any comments? Jaika, would you like to comment? Professor Kolita? Anyway, that was a very interesting talk about the way things evolved. Even though I suppose a lot of time we need not spend on those different methods unless we have of an academic interest, because we are very fortunate to yet have the Theravada with us, which is Sri Lanka is that way, and Burma. And I was just reading a few days ago a book written by Anagarika Dharmapala, where he had many issues where, say, when any progress was made in recovering the Bodh Gaya site, and the Burmese had come and put up a rest house there, which was good for guests. Immediately the Japanese that would be another corrupted, perhaps, form of Mahayana, would come and, while Anagarika Dharmapala had also sided with the Burmese and they had finally got this going, if he went on a foreign tour, he returns to find things have gone backwards because the Japanese have come and told the Mahanta, or whatever that Hinduism, the people who were in control, and the government of India at the time, with the regional whatever powers, that we are very similar to your Hinduism, so let's get rid of this Burmese guest house and change it to something else. So there was backward, to any progress he made. If he left the scene, things changed when he came back. So it's a very interesting book here called The Arya Dharma of Sakyamuni Gautama the Buddha by Anagarika Dharmapala, and his battles with this. So that was very much in line with what we heard today, those different concepts, whatever. Thank you, Professor Amaratunaga. And in the absence of any other questions or comments, I think we can terminate in the usual way with Anumodana. I would like to inform that next week, November 4th, it will be on Zoom as well as a hybrid event from Maitreya Hall. And the topic is one of great importance, the Sabbasava Sutta, about getting rid of the deep-rooted defilements, the asrava. And the speaker is again a very good speaker, when our patron, Venerable Vajrarame Siri Jnanasiha Thero. So please try your best to not miss that. And with that, I think we can thank Professor Amaratunaga for having shared with us his research. Couldn't have been easy. All this, even the Silk Road, he being involved the dental sciences. It's not that he was into Buddhist studies or history, or so that is particularly praiseworthy, and that your interests were so wide, and also you took so much trouble. So in the absence of any other questions, let us end in the usual way with sharing this merit of today's what we have contemplated on, and we should know to appreciate and value the Theravada Buddhism, or that of the elders' view, which today we still have with us. And we also recognize where things can err. If we know why now, it can help to see them as really being deviations or aberrations. And so with that, let us share this merit with the departed, all those who have departed from this society, starting from the founders, and all those office bearers and whoever who, and let us, with the devas, we share with the devas, the protective devas, and with all sentient beings, all those who helped to make this day a success. Let them be well and happy. Let us finish with Ettavatata ammehi sampadam punya sampadang sabbe deva anumodantu sabba sampatti siddhya. Ettavatata ammehi sampadam punya sampadang sabbe bhuta anumodantu sabba sampatti siddhya. Ettavatata ammehi sampadam punya sampadang sabbe satta anumodantu sabba sampatti siddhya. Dhamme ñātinang hotu sukita huntu ñātayo. Dhammo ñātinang hotu sukita huntu ñātayo. Dhammo ñātinang hotu sukita huntu ñātayo. And once again, thank you all Dhamma friends who took time and who listened to this very fascinating and interesting talk from Professor NADS Amaratunaga. And thank you, Professor Amaratunaga.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. That's been a pleasure really to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. There are several comments here, a couple of them, I think, which just two others, which are positive comments. I will end the meeting then till we meet next Saturday. May you all be well and happy.